Jobs Day in America. So many businesses looking for workers, and yet so many people still unemployed. What is going on? Plus, Mike Pence speaking publicly for the first time about his relationship with President Trump. And Twitter's made some changes, but not the one that everyone has been asking for. Of course, we're talking about the edit button. Friday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Friday, June 4th. I am Jill Wagner. Carlo is still on paternity leave, but I am very excited because we have JD Durkin on the podcast today. JD is Cheddar's White House correspondent and seriously one of my favorite people ever. JD, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be with you, Jill. Good morning.
Okay, so I do want to give you a little time to just promo your new show because it's pretty cool. You're doing this new primetime show on Cheddar. It's called None of the Above. Can you quickly tell us about it before we get to some of the news here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, look, Jill, in the spirit of everything cool that we've covered at Cheddar since day one, that we'll be bringing the spirit of curiosity to primetime to still cover the latest and coolest in space, rocketry, and big tech. We'll have amazing guests, and I want to put a focus on headlines people may not see elsewhere in the 8 o'clock hour or may have seen and may not fully understand. I really want to convey the stories that matter to people and make them understand why certain stories matter to them. I think we'll have a ton of fun in the process. We cover news seriously without taking ourselves too seriously, and we kick off Monday, June 7th at 8 o'clock. What a privilege. Cannot wait to get going.
Oh, that's great. I love it. And I try to do that too, which is I want to be serious about the news, but I'm not a serious person. I'm just not. And so I very much appreciate that kind of mindset getting into it. On that note, let's get to some news, which is kind of serious. So we are recording this podcast a little bit later than usual. And on the first Friday of the month, that means that the job report for the previous month has actually come out already. So we could talk about it. The numbers for May, 559,000 jobs created last month. That is a miss from the expectation of 650,000. The unemployment rate slid a bit lower to 5.8%. April's numbers, JD, also pretty awful. Fewer than 300,000 new jobs were created. Expectations were for about 1 million. And a lot of reasons given here. So there are these extra unemployment benefits. Some say they're just too generous, people making more money not working. Then you've got parents who still have kids who are in remote learning. They don't have childcare, so they can't physically go back to work. But it is this kind of wild situation where you see help wanted signs everywhere. And yet so many people still unemployed. What do you make of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think another component about this, I think the childcare component for so many moms and dads, and especially particular communities that are disproportionately impacted, they feel like we are not in the position where we can simply return to work. And there's also been a lot of interesting releases I've noticed from groups like AARP that say on the other end of the spectrum, a lot of people are considering early retirement, Jill, in ways that they have not done before. I don't know if it's just this embrace of you only get one life, and we've all been rattled in the pandemic, and I do not want to work. I just want to spend time with my loved ones and travel and do cool things. I think that's a component of it. And with that, no matter what the numbers were, Republicans and Democrats here in Washington, we're going to say the same things. Republicans are going to say, well, this is clearly evidence. These unemployment benefits are too big. Democrats are spending. They are incentivizing people to stay away. Democrats will argue the exact opposite. They say these numbers are lower than expected. That is evidence. We need to pass the American Jobs Plan, the American Families Plan. We need to do more to help people. Those press releases, I'm pretty safely assuming, were written pretty much before the numbers even came out. It's now just a matter of hitting send to our inboxes.
I feel like, did they write two press releases? The press release that if it's going to be kind of this amazing number that blows it out of the park, and then if it's a disappointing number, and then just figure out, which one they're going to send once the number comes out?
From all my friends who work in Capitol Hill communications, I'm relatively sure that's how it works. Yeah, absolutely. So they got their talking points ready. They'll be hitting the airwaves here for interviews today, and we will have remarks from President Biden later on today as well.
I think there is something to back what you said about so many people who are retiring early, like that statement that you said from the AARP. I've seen that. My mom is a teacher, or was a teacher. She retired. She had been every year wrestling with retirement. And every year we're like, why are you even debating? You know, you're not going to retire. She loved her
Mm.
job. And she finally retired over the pandemic. And she said so many
Wow.
other teachers are retiring as well, just because they're like, they can't deal with the remote school. And it's just, as you say, maybe a time to rethink priorities a little bit. I
Well,
want to talk
congratulations to
also.
her. That's huge.
Yes. And the shame of it was that for a year she was retired but couldn't babysit because of COVID, but now everyone's
Of
vaccinated,
course.
so she's back in the mix. I also want to talk about this big announcement from the Biden administration yesterday when it comes to vaccine diplomacy. The White House announcing this plan to send about 75% of the United States' unused COVID-19 vaccines to the UN-backed COVAX. It's that global vaccine sharing program. The first doses going to South and Central America, Asia, and Africa, amongst others. The U.S. is going to keep 25% of its vaccine in reserve in case of an emergency. And Biden says the U.S. will also give away 60 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine, which not yet approved for use in the U.S. I feel like this giving away the AstraZeneca vaccine to me is not like the most generous thing I've ever heard, because it's like if I'm at a restaurant, okay, and I give my husband like the side dish on my meal that I don't actually like, I feel like I look like the hero, but I wasn't going to eat it anyway. Um, but there are questions, which is A, why have we still not approved the AstraZeneca vaccine? You know, I
Mm.
wonder just what data are they still waiting for here, given the fact that it is basically the go-to vaccine around the world at this point. But do you think that perhaps we'll get a little goodwill here from being generous with some of these vaccines?
Yeah, I mean, you certainly hope so, right? I mean, I think the spirit of COVAX has said that no one is safe around the world until everyone is safe. And it's the recognition at this point, Jill, that governments cannot be competing for these resources. It's just far too lopsided in the global system, right? The strengthening countries are always going to outcompete the more vulnerable countries. And I think that's the spirit of what this White House right now is specifically trying to do. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has said places like the Gaza Strip will get a focus. Certainly, India will get a focus. You'll see what other countries end up coming into play there. But I think this is also kind of part of the broader diplomatic approach by the Biden White House to really set itself apart from its predecessor, Donald Trump, who put America first repeatedly and criticized other countries around the world, demanded they pay more for this and that, demanded they step up their own resources. I think the Biden White House wants to be seen instead to say, this is the once in a lifetime public health crisis. The United States of America needs to be the leader to actually put this pandemic firmly behind us and recognize that there is a unique responsibility that being the greatest country on earth actually has if we are going to help the most vulnerable countries around the world. And I think that approach to equity first, actually, you keep hearing that word attached to COVAX. It's about equity, not equality. The Biden White House is doing that with domestic policies. And I think through this vaccine diplomacy, it's how they're looking to do it around the world as well.
Do countries know though where the vaccine is coming from? I feel like we need like a big American flag or something. Like this is the American tent that you're getting the Pfizer vaccine. I'm
Just so you
joking, but I'm
know,
kind of
yeah,
not.
it's got like a little like USA sticker on it. I don't know if every individual person will know, but I think certainly a lot of news networks around the world will be inclined to say this comes from America. But I don't know. That's a good question.
Really quickly, I just wanted to mention another piece of news related to COVID. Scientists say they've discovered a new oral antiviral drug that can treat people who do get sick from COVID-19. As we know, as many people have been vaccinated, there are plenty more that have not. Researchers say the drug seems to prevent the virus from replicating and thus would limit the more severe side effects of COVID. It's still undergoing studies, but in theory, doctors hope that patients would be able to basically just take it at home at the first signs of infection. Huge news. JD, I know you had COVID early on, actually, in the pandemic, and we get kind of personal here on this podcast. Have you had any lingering impacts from it? We talk so much about long haulers. I'm just curious if you're feeling 100%.
Hey, let's get personal. 100% got back on my feet, within, a week or two when that happened last May or April. I think the second vaccine kind of knocked me out like for a day or two like it did. But if you want to get really personal here, Jill, and I have not said this, and it's a very sad moment for my family, but we lost a family member just a week ago to COVID complications, and we had his funeral
Wow.
yesterday in New Jersey. And I tell you that because that is such a reminder that behind every number, every statistic you see, there's a family that's grieving. There's a widow or widower who lost his or her partner. There's a child, a 4-year-old in my family who's got to grow up without her daddy. And to think that we've gone through this pandemic over a full year and we are still dealing with deaths daily. It's great to get shots in arms. It's great to reopen. It's great to have a hot vax summer, but people are struggling in this country. People will continue to lose their lives in this country. They'll continue to lose their lives around the world. And these studies are great, but their practicality for rollout is going to take some time. And in the case of this one family member, he fought it as hard as he could for over a month in the hospital, and there was just
Wow.
seemingly nothing that they could do. So I only bring that up to get personal, yes, but to also remind people that this fight very much continues. These are great headlines, but to roll them out is something altogether different.
JD, I think that that's so incredibly important. My condolences to you and your family on that. We're
Thank
at
you.
600,000 deaths actually in this country, which is a number that's hard to fathom. And I always say, and I know it may sound crazy, but I picture the big house in Ann Arbor, which holds about 120,000 people. So I always just think, okay, times that by 5. All of those people are no longer here because
Hmm.
they lost their lives to COVID. And I talked, my friend Erica lost her father really early on in March of last year because of the pandemic, and she'll never be the same, right? And she watches her
Hmm.
son grow up without a grandfather. It is
Wow.
heartbreaking. And thank you for sharing that. I'm kind of like choking up about it because the story is so hard to cover, especially because uh, cameras are not allowed really into hospitals. You know, you
Yeah.
don't see people dying of this virus. Just logistically, it's not an easy story to tell. So thank you for that.
Thank
I
you.
wanted because you are here. This might be a little bit politically politics heavy, but I wanted to also get your take on these comments from Mike Pence yesterday, the former VP. He gave his first speech since leaving office on Thursday. He commented on the January 6th riots. He said, President Trump and I have spoken many times since we left office, and I don't know if we'll ever see eye to eye on that day, but I will always be proud of what we accomplished for the American people over the last 4 years. Just a reminder, some of the rioters that day were literally yelling, hang Mike Pence. What do you make of it? And what is Mike Pence's future in this party?
I have absolutely no idea what I feel. So I kind of feel bad for the former VP. I really do. I mean, this man was governor of Indiana. He attached himself onto this ticket with this absolute character that I feel like he has very little in common with. He did the job. He kept quiet for 4 years. He did what he had to do. He got the evangelical base in. He went to parts of the country. He fought for this guy. He defended this guy. And now he is just absolutely getting stabbed in the back, similarly to Mitch McConnell. But I think if you're Vice President Mike Pence, yeah, of course your eyes are on 2024 because every Republican's eyes are on 2024. But Donald Trump, remember, recently said that Mike Pence lacked the courage to overturn the election. And I think Pence is like a lot of other kind of normally, more or less normally thinking, sane people who are like, okay, well, I can't really give in to this massive conspiratorial, grift heavy lie that the election was stolen. And now is has to kind of delicately say put it the nice way in public comments to say, well, I guess we'll never quite see eye to eye, which is the nicest way possible. I wonder what he really thinks though. But no, I mean this to me is the Trump lane of DeSantis and Greg Abbott and Matt Gaetz for sure and Marjorie Taylor Greene. That is the heart and soul of the party. And I think people who are on Trump's bad side right now don't have much of a fighting chance in the near future for the GOP.
Okay, my last question on politics, because I do want to move on, but I again want to take advantage of the fact that you're here. What becomes of the Republican Party, but also the Democratic Party, which we've seen there's the progressives that are not necessarily in line with the moderates. It feels that there's no place for moderate views in American politics right now, and no place for compromise, and no one who really is saying, "Hey, let's all work with the person on the other side of the aisle. Let's get a drink after work." Do you envision potentially maybe a third party of moderates breaking off? How does this eventually play out? Because ultimately, moderates want a voice too, and they're just being drowned out both on the left and the right.
I love this question. I spend so much time here in DC, like out with people being like, God, at what point do we break this two-party system and create three or four through like a ranked choice voting thing that can better compete and put people that are more like-minded, not force them to choose. It's not a binary. It's not every like black or white, right? I mean, there is such this middle ground right now that is increasingly being quieted out. I don't see that happening anytime soon. But I just said this to a podcast host yesterday. Many of our founding fathers, we've had one president in U.S. history who was not a member of a political party, and it was our first one. And that's because George Washington believed that would be an ill fate for our democratic republic. And many of our founding fathers believe the same. We are seeing the ills of that to this day. I don't see it changing. But yes, I agree that spirit is there, and those calls will continue for more political parties. I am pro breaking up the two-party system for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and just the way the whole system is with primaries, it's like the more extreme person, on it wins usually the primary because you have the more political people coming out more motivated to vote. We will, I don't know, just keep us honest on that, JD, as you do any reporting. And if you hear any momentum about a third party, we definitely want to know about it. Okay, another really big story. There is a serious water emergency going on in California right now. California Governor Gavin Newsom has put 41 counties under a state of emergency because of severe drought. California's reservoirs are 50% lower than normal ahead of the summer wildfire season, and experts warn that the drought could have devastating consequences for agriculture, for wildlife, for tourism in the state. JD, I know you just got back from Lake Mead, and you saw the impact firsthand.
It's one thing to see climate headlines and think this is a disaster or an ongoing crisis or an emergency that you can't really see. It's something altogether, and I encourage everyone, if you can get to Arizona and Nevada and see Lake Mead for yourself, it is the clearest visual representation of what has happened since the 1990s. They call it the bathtub, Jill. It's this massive ring of white, and the water level year after year after year is just going down and down and down. It all comes back to runoff from the Rockies and the Colorado River. They are set to trigger a 7-state emergency, which includes Wyoming, includes California, Nevada, New Mexico as well, the 7 states in the basin. And it just comes down to runoff. There just was not enough precipitation yet again, year after year, up in the Rocky Mountains. And that is having devastating impacts on the economy, on the ecology, on life for people who rely on those water basins. The casinos are not panicked yet in Vegas, and everyone in Nevada tells me you only get worried if the casinos get worried, and they don't seem to be worried right now about water conservation, but they have been before, and I know everyone in Nevada is certainly very concerned about what the summer ahead will hold.
I mean, when tourists who go to the casinos are basically told that they can't shower they can only take a shower every other day, I think that's when they might be concerned about it. But it's devastating. Like we said, there's agriculture, there's wildfire. I mean, this is the effects of this are so widespread. And what's crazy is that climate change has always felt like so theoretical for so long. But now, as you mentioned, we are physically seeing the impacts, and that tells you something. When parts of glaciers are literally breaking off, and you can just see it in real time, you've got to think something's going on. I tend to think, I mean, are we at the point of no return? I know we talk about the Climate Paris Accord, the Paris Climate Accord, and all of these things that we're doing here, but is it too late? I don't know.
Yeah, and I also talk with a lot of people in like the animal agriculture space or anti-animal agriculture space who say, hey, it's one thing to have the CO2 conversation. They say the Paris Climate Accord and other things the U.S. are doing, we're not even touching nitrous oxide or methane gas emissions. We're not even having the conversation about our relationship with consuming meat and dairy around the world and what that's doing for the spirit of deforestation, using our freshwater resources, having a negative impact in terms of animal release on the planet. So, the Paris Climate Accords and what we've tried to do is certainly one thing, but there's a lot of activists who say we are not nearly doing enough. And I think the whole situation is hurt by the fact that we don't have these like emergency gripping images to really
Right.
convey it. It's a slow moving crisis, and that means it's tough for people to wrap their heads around sometimes.
Okay, we don't have a whole lot of time. I wanted to get you quickly to weigh in on these changes coming to Twitter. Twitter releasing its first subscription product, Twitter Blue. It gives users the option to undo a tweet. It costs $2.99 a month. It's available right now in Australia and Canada. There's still no edit button. You are an avid Twitter user. Just quickly, what do you think? Is this a step in the right direction?
I guess just seems to me like a little bit of a revenue grab. They need to compete in the advertising space against the Snapchats of the world, and this to me is just an effort to make money. Everyone wants that edit button. I don't see it happening anytime soon, though, unfortunately.
There's nothing worse than sending out a tweet, realizing you used the wrong version of their or your, and then you've already got comments on it, and you're like, what do I do? Do I erase the tweet? Do I just leave it? Do I write a little asterisk saying, oh, I know my grammar was off? I guess you could just wait.
You always love to have a big
edit.
viral tweet or something that pops off, and you're like, oh, I spelled that word wrong.
JD, I could chat with you forever, but unfortunately, we gotta go. Thank you so much for coming on, and really good luck on your new primetime show.
Thank you, Jill. You've always been one of my favorites. Really appreciate getting to join you today. Thanks.
All right, everyone, that is what you need to know for Friday, June 4th. Have a great weekend.